Hey, how's it going? Stephen here from understandingaudio.com, where we clear up the confusion around music mixing and production. I teach the why as well as the how so I can help you produce better music. If you're new and this is the first time you're hearing my voice, or even if it isn't, hit that subscribe button. And anything that I mention in this video that needs quick access will be linked in the description box down below. So let's get going. Today I want to share an interview I recorded with the super talented Gavin O'Brien, who goes by the stage name and releases music under the name Citóg. That might sound like a strange name, but it does have a meaning in the Irish language, which Gavin will explain to you. But besides the meaning of his name, he's got a lot more to say and he's done a lot of interesting things. He's done what a lot of people want to do and left a successful career in a big city to focus on his music career and creative path. Not only has he been working full-time as a musician from his own home studio for the past few years, but he's also released his debut album as Citóg while in lockdown and sheltering from coronavirus, like we're all unfortunately doing right now. And if you're listening to this in the future, I'm happy that we're out of this. So in this interview, you're going to hear a bit about his background as a musician, how he made the career move into music, set up his own home studio and creative space, went about writing and releasing an album, how collaboration helped him achieve his goals, how setting a deadline and sticking to it was so important for him, and then what he learned about recording an album in a home studio, and of course how that relates to you, and much more. And stick around till the end of the interview because Gavin has a special gift for those of you with longer attention spans. But seriously, Gavin O'Brien is one of the most talented musicians I've ever had the privilege of meeting and working with. He's also one of the nicest humans you could meet. So let's get to it, and you can meet him in virtual form. Now, over to me in the past. All right, Gavin O'Brien, also known as Citóg, welcome. How are you getting on with lockdown?
Grand. The first 2 weeks I was starting to go a little bit crazy, but that's because I was here on my own for the first week, and then the lockdown happened and my housemate came down with his girlfriend, so at least I've got some company and I'm not talking to myself and the fish. But yeah, it's been okay since I've had company.
And have you been getting much music work done?
To be honest, I've been doing a lot of online piano courses because I've just sort of had a bit of a block. I got maybe 2 or 3 tracks done in the last 2 weeks. But yeah, I was just sitting down making 32-bar loops. They're not really going anywhere because I don't really have anything lyrically to write about, except, what it looks like through my window. But yeah, so rather than just being complacent, just said at least I can improve on something. And while I have writer's block, I suppose. So not a whole lot, but not as much as I'd like to have been. But
So what's your, just to share with people, what's your actual background as a musician? Have you gotten to kind of this point of, because you've just released your debut album, how have you gone from starting out as a musician to getting to that point? What were the kind of main points along the journey that you'd want people to know about you?
Well, so I did some grades in classical piano when I was young, like, a child. Then gave that up because I wanted to be out with the lads instead of practicing for 2 hours a day. So I'd done maybe 3 years of that, gave it up. Still liked playing piano, just didn't do the lessons. And then when I really got into music seriously was when I took up drums when I was about 14. And that didn't take any guilt into practicing. It was more, Gavin, you've been playing for 4 hours and you're driving us crazy. Can you please come up for dinner? So I got quite obsessive with drums. And where I met you then was in Maynooth. That was to study to, basically I wanted to be a producer, be able to record myself. At that time I was big into jazz, like small band jazz, quartets and quintets, and thought I'm going to be a poor struggling jazz drummer for the rest of my life, and I was happy with it. And then in Maynooth, my the piano skills that I'd learned younger, or when I was younger, they really came into play a lot when we started studying music theory. And I didn't realize that my comprehension of it was just much better than I thought it was. And found that part a lot easier. And then when we did sound synthesis, that just took me in a completely different direction. Got really into synthesizers and drone programming, and just got more into electronic music. And I think the big decision was when I moved to London from Ireland. I brought my piano and synth, and I didn't bring my drums. So I think that was kind of the big decision. I just wanted to be able to write full pieces rather than just focusing on percussion and rhythm. I wanted to write lyrics. I wanted to write melody. I was big into harmony, and there's only so much you can do with drums.
You couldn't fit your drums on the plane, no?
I mean, we could have, but I also was moving over to a childhood friend of mine who was an incredible drummer as well, Jeff Higgins. And so we played in a band for a few years together. And when somebody else can do something better than you, then you just, let them take the wheel.
So you were talking about Maynooth. That's Maynooth University, where we both studied. What made you go from studying and living and working in Maynooth which is it's a nice town, quite a small university town, to moving to London, to just leaving everything behind, moving here. We're both in London. Well, I'm in London. You're now in Hastings, which we get to in a bit. But what made you move to a big city like London?
A lot of the Well, I mean, I had a long-term girlfriend at the time. I had to consult there as well, but she was more than happy to just follow along with the plans. But a lot of the music that I was listening to around that time was coming out of London. And I mean, when was that? About 2010. And I was, listening to Airhead and James Blake and that kind of buzz. And I just wanted to be around it, kind of submerge myself in it. In Ireland, especially with the electronic scene, has come on like leaps and bounds in the last few years. But at the time, there's a lot of folk music, a lot of which is music that I absolutely loved, kind of before that time. But it's not the music that I wanted to make. And so I just never been around a scene, so to say, that I really loved, and I just kind of wanted to be there for it. So just moved over kind of on a whim, had some savings, and said, sure, we'll give this a go for a while. And then I was over there maybe 6 months, and we got booked for a festival over in Latvia, and kind of threw a band together to play a bigger stage there than I was expecting to, and it just kind of snowballed for the next couple of years. And then I never looked back. I hadn't really made a full plan to stay in London forever, but just kind of worked out that way. I fell in love with the city. I fell in love with the music there, and it was basically just for music.
And now you're on the South Coast.
Yeah. Great.
You've got a nice setup where you are.
Well, with this lockdown, man, I'm delighted that I made the move 2 years ago, because I'd be knocking my head off the wall if I was stuck in London. At least we can go for a walk on the beach in the evenings, and
all right, rub it in. That's fine. Yeah. Got the beach outside your front door. So the main point about all this, I think, which is just about your background. You're in London. You're a touring musician. You're a gigging musician. You're also DJing around the place as well. And now you're doing that. We're doing it in a smaller place where you can actually get to London, and you can get to other cities under normal circumstances quite easily to perform and to gig. And prior to the whole events industry, and prior to music and live music stopping, that's how you were making your living. You were doing it through DJing, doing it through performing. And now the great thing about all this is that you've been able to consolidate a lot of the music that you've written over the years with new ideas, and you've released an album, which is your debut album as Citóg. So how did it come about that you focus your time into, because it's very hard for a lot of people to finish what they start, and to, especially a full album, to actually consolidate your thoughts and consolidate your ideas into an album. How did it come about that you actually finished that writing process, or even started it? How did the album come about?
Well, I mean, I've been kind of sitting on 2 or 3 of the songs from the album from before I moved down here. The reason for me moving down here was to just kind of invest in it myself, invest time in it, and put in the effort that I just didn't have time for when I was in London. I mean, I was working as well in London, and just managing bars, and it just took up too much time. And said, well, if I want to do this properly, I need to be able to not worry about money, not worry about anything else, not give myself any excuses for not spending enough time on it. So I moved down to Hastings, where I could easily afford the rent, without having to get, well, I say a proper job, but like a day job. So I was just getting by on gigs, DJing. So that was 3 nights a week. I'd be playing gigs, the odd time maybe 4. And then Monday to Friday during the day, just be practicing the boring stuff, practicing scales on piano, making sure I got back to the level where I was before I go to record takes, exercising my voice again, all that kind of stuff, and just putting in the time. And that's what Hastings gave me the freedom to do, not worry about money, not worry about anything else. And so then I just started writing a lot. I mean, I have a lot written that's not on the album as well, but I find with these kind of things, you can be prolific in your writing, but then you end up being kind of an editor of yourself. You have to be able to throw away a few songs that don't fit or don't capture the mood of the album. It needs to be a kind of a unified entity. And so that's ultimately what it was. We landed on the 7 songs selected. It was going to be 10 before, but a few of them, I just don't think they fit, and they didn't really, because the other 3 were going to be after the last song that's on it now, and I think the mood needs to be the same throughout all of them, and those ones just didn't fit. So you end up kind of being a bit rootless, and yeah.
Yeah.
But
so
then,
sorry, go ahead.
Where the actual kind of I suppose maybe inspiration for most of the album, or at least the musings of it, are so Nadir, the name of it, is like a low point on a graph, and especially not necessarily the time that I was writing it was the low point, but maybe the 2 years before that was sort of a low point for me, I suppose. And then so I was kind of writing about that like retroactively, or retrospectively. And yeah, just like throwing a wobbler and quitting my job and having a breakup and moving house and all those things. And I don't know, I remember starting to write a lot of the songs, but when you're in the moment and you're lethargic and you don't finish anything, like you were saying, it was when I moved down here and got to rewrite a lot of them that I kind of was a bit more productive.
So left a big city, moved to a place where your cost of living is going to be lower. Started to play. Your job became music anyway, because you were gigging and you were playing events and you were DJing. But during the day, you were able to focus on your passion, and you were able to go back to the very basics of being a musician, working through your scales, working through your theory, and trying to massage those ideas that you'd created into something that could be usable and really good finished songs. And then to put that together as an album is great. And it's something that a lot of people kind of think about doing and don't do. And especially at the moment, people are thinking about, oh, what should I be doing and what's next? And you kind of preempted that by doing this 2 years ago and isolating yourself from busy London and moving to a smaller place. But what's interesting is that you said we decided on these songs. You you wrote all these yourself. All the ideas, it's all self-written. The sounds on the album, everything is created by you. All of the sounds are selected by you, all played by you. Everything is you. But you mentioned we when it comes to selecting the songs, and I'd be interested to know how much collaboration did you have on it? Well, I know already, but I think people would be interested to know, was there any collaboration on it with people that helped you to select the songs for the album, and how did that actually work?
Yeah, well, for a song selection, so Jeff, the drummer I was talking about that I moved over to, I live with him down in Hastings, and he was quite important for me for my development into this kind of music. He was already living over here for 5 years before I was, and he was deep into, you know, knowing where to go for the best music, and you know, he just followed it really well. And so he kind of took me by the hand a little bit through that whole scene. So I value his opinion like hugely, and he kind of understands mood. I mean, we grew up listening to a lot of the same music, and yeah, so for selection, I would have bounced ideas off him a lot. And then Matt Canham, he's produces and writes with Playton, but he mixed the tracks for me. And so I just sent him the stems. I'd been mixing them myself for about a year, and you know, it's like taking a painting off a child when it's done. I was just doing little things and then not even saving the changes, because you know, you're just playing around with it, and perfection is the enemy of good, you know, that you just never release anything because it's never finished. And so we had recorded a couple tunes together in the church in London, and he just offered. He said, like, look, if you need fresh ears, I can just take them off you. If you don't like the mixes, you don't need to use them. And everything he did was just flipping great. And then, well, I mean, you know, you mastered it as well. It's great to have friends in high places, you know, who can kind of, you know, feed you the bottle every so often when you need it. But yeah, so between, I think, the three of you, and then, of course, there's kind of art direction and stuff. So Will Reed painted the album cover, and Evo films and photographs everything for me. And it's really just a kind of a band of friends type thing. Even if I'm writing it and producing it, there's a lot more goes into it. And I've kind of learned from trying to do everything myself and not releasing anything in all that time where I was doing it myself, because I sort of have an understanding of roughly how to master a track, or how to mix a track, or how to take a photograph, or all these little things. But when there's somebody nearby that's better, then it took a while for me to kind of pull my ego in check a little bit, I suppose, to just be like, you don't have to do everything. Like, there are people better than you at these things, and you might as well use them.
Yeah, like that level of collaboration is always going to help you get stuff over the finish line. It gives you your time back as well, which is always going to be limited. And that's part of the move, was to focus on writing new material. Wasn't to focus on writing new material, shoot all the photos for it, mix it, master it, do all the label relations, everything else, and get it out that way. And all the distribution, like, it's not gonna work if you're doing it all yourself. But you mentioned where it was recorded. You said it was recorded in the church in London. That's not just a random church. That is the church that is a studio owned by Paul Epworth. So it's quite a cool place to record a few tracks. But the rest, and the majority of the album recorded at home, or was it done in a studio like the church, or was it done in another studio?
No, all at home. I'm trying to think. Yeah, there was nothing recorded in studio, actually, not out of those tracks. Yeah, the only thing that, because I have everything here really. Vocals would be the kind of main thing that, listening back to it now, that I would record properly in the studio, just because I don't have a treated room. And while that's okay, because all the songs were recorded like that, so at least there's they're kind of unified in their sound. But if I were to have one or two tracks in the album that were recorded in a proper booth with, you know, the proper setup, it'd stand out like a sore thumb, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would say for the next round, I'll either do all in the studio for the vocals or all at home again.
Yeah,
because I think having it continuity, I think, is quite important.
It's very important because especially if you're creating thematic albums, if you got a similar enough sound, a cohesive sound the whole way through, if something is different, if you got a vocal that's been recorded in one space and then recorded in another, it can work. But if there's a certain sound to the vocals the whole way through, it can throw the listener's ear off, and they might not know what exactly it is, unless they're sort of technically minded. But it'll sound a bit off. If you were to do the vocals at home again, which you don't necessarily need to do everything in a studio, if you have the option to do it and the resources are available to you to do it, then I recommend doing that. But if you were to create another album, which I'm sure you will, if you were going to do it at home, what would you do differently to capture a better, not a better vocal performance, but a better recording of your vocal performance, if you feel like it was an issue on this album? Which I don't think it is.
I think no, it's just that it's a different sound than normal recorded songs, but then the music is a bit different as well, I suppose. I tend to go for the more emotional take rather than the perfect signal, you know. And that's just an artistic decision. That's like, well, I like the way my voice cracked there and it sounded like I was going to cry, or, you know, those little things are more important to me than there might be a plosive pop on the mic in that take, but I'll concede that so as that I get the more emotional one. And that's just an artistic decision that you have to make. Ideally, you'd have both perfect, but it doesn't always work that way. What I would do different, I would deaden the room a lot more. I mean, I'm a bit lucky here that we have couches and soft furnishings and carpet, and I can put up some cushions around it or whatever. But it's still quite a big room, and they're, you know, big high ceilings with thick concrete walls, and it does resonate. So yeah, I think I'd work on that a lot.
Yeah. But that's based on the feel that you're creating as well. Like you're at least for your previous album, you were recording quite a dry vocal sound to be able to process it and affect it. But if you were recording, let's say, more natural vocals, the high ceilings and the big room and the soft carpet, the soft floor, might actually stand to your benefit. In that sort of situation.
True. That is true. Yeah. My reason for wanting a dead signal is because I tend to play around with effects a lot, and it's better to affect everything before I put it through any reverb unit or before I put it through any compressor, so as that the effect itself is compressed as well.
Yeah.
For me, it's better that because a lot of my vocals, they're quite rhythmic. And so it's important that when I finish a syllable, that it finishes on the beat and there's no tail. And, you know, it just ends up blurring the rhythm a little bit when you have that extra ring, that extra resonance. It just doesn't stop on the beat.
Yeah.
And then you've got to go in and edit everything. It's just very time consuming.
People often overlook that with reverb, in that it's a time based effect as well, in that if you've got a tail at the end of a phrase, it's going to affect the timing of what comes next. And then if you cut that off to tailor to, you know, you need silence before, let's say, a big chorus or something like that, it's going to sound really unnatural because you've taken out that natural reverb. So your approach was record as dead as possible so that there isn't any natural reverb on it, so you can process it in whatever way you're going to process it. Then you can compress and you can add your EQ, add your compression, and then delay, reverb, modulation, everything like that kind of comes after the fact. But if you take in the signal from a very live room, you were limited on what you could do then. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you like you had your producer hat on straight away. Then when you were writing and when you were figuring things out and how you were going to put this album together, you were also thinking about things like that, thinking about your vocal sound and thinking about how everything connects. So you had a plan in advance of actually recording the songs of how you wanted it. You had a structure and you had an idea of how you wanted it to sound.
Yeah, definitely with the vocals. Yeah, I mean, with the music, there's stuff you layer on afterwards, or if the crescendo doesn't really pop enough, or what, you can add on some extra pads or add on extra drum beat. So with the music, that kind of evolves as it's writing, but with the vocals, it tends to be while I'm recording it, I kind of know the sound, the end product that I want, and work towards that. I mean, there's obviously a few exceptions, like Let Me, that tune. That was the first, one of the vocal takes on that was just in the middle of the night. It was with some headphone microphone that was hanging off my thing, but because I was affecting it so much, and it was a more atmospheric vocal part, that I just went with that. I mean, I was only recording it as a memo so that I'd re-record it the next day, but I kind of liked the fact that you could hear the pots opening when I put the gate on, and that ended up being part of the rhythm. And so every so often you find mistakes end up being the hook.
I can hear engineers everywhere screaming at you right now. So
yeah, let them scream. It's grand. not artists.
And a question that everybody gets asked: what do you use to write? What software do you use to write in? Is it a Logic? You in Live, Pro Tools? What do you use?
Logic. I've started from working with Matt. I've started playing around with Ableton for writing, but I'm a lot more fluent on Logic. And I have my short keys set up that way that if I'm starting in Ableton now, it's like I have to learn it all again. So it's mostly Logic, and then for synthesizers, I have an Axis Music Virus B. So that's my outboard main synth, and then we have like Microkorg, and I've a Roland MC505 that I use for a lot of drum samples. But I've really just gotten into recording like Foley style samples for drums, just little, scratching a bit of wool, or just using condenser mic to record, like tapping the table, and that can be my hi-hat if I just take out the low end. And Logic is it's really easy to do. Editing samples in Logic I find really intuitive. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me because Ableton is made for that, but I find it easy because I've used it for 10, 12 years.
Yeah, so it's familiarity, but it's interesting that you mentioned about recording your own samples. I think there's people have been doing that for as long as recording engineering and music production has existed, but there seems to be a trend now for people to want, in certain styles of music, more live sounds rather than going through endless sample banks and VSTs to try and find what they want. They just get a microphone and just, like, if you've got claps or finger clicks, or like you said, creating your own hi-hats, creating your own sounds, I think it's going to help you. It's going to help you stand out. Is there on the album that's out now, is there a favorite technique that you have, something that you created that was a bit like, oh, I'm really proud of that. That's something that I haven't done before, or something that you tried that you weren't sure was going to work out, but actually ended up sounding really good?
There's ones, there's a few that were, so there's a little bit of latency on my microphone, maybe like 90 milliseconds or something. So when I'm recording if I have everything snapped to the grid, I tend to click along, for the first 4 counts with the metronome, just so I can line it up and see that click on the waveform. And I only do it just as a marker, so I can move it and know that, okay, that must be the 90 milliseconds. I can move that over. But then for example, the start of Let Me, with those clicks, that's all that was. And then ended up playing around at that because it just happened to be a nice bright click signal. And to be honest, that's kind of what got me into doing it, was put some delay on that, a little bit of reverb. And we're like, oh, there's my intro, really, just with the simple backing music and just have some clicks that kind of sets the atmosphere. And it was from that then I just started substituting out some of the electronic samples that I just have sample banks that I've, bought or downloaded, and just started replacing those with my own ones. And because it's recorded on the same mic and same room, then you get the same kind of warmth around it. Yeah, I think that one I was really happy with, but that's probably because it was the first one that kind of opened my eyes to it.
And it's interesting because it seems like even though you had a plan, and even though you had songs that you wanted to write and you wanted to get out there, that you actually learned a lot by going through your own process, your own writing process, and creating an album. You seem to have picked up things or taught yourself things or experimented that you're now using to create a new bank of songs. But what's also interesting is that you say right now you're focusing on your musicianship rather than writing new material, because we're all at the moment more or less in isolation. We're having very limited conversations and interactions and next to no social gatherings to actually gain new stories and new concepts to create new material. So to me, that would indicate that like what you want to make next is based on what's happening right now versus what's happening in the past. Is that what you're thinking? You want to be inspired by what's going on at the moment?
I mean, I don't know what'll come out, to be honest. That's only, I suppose that side of things is only to do with the lyrics, maybe, for me. I mean, the fact that I was writing lyrics about things before. Definitely the music I'm writing now, since the album has been out of my hands, it'd be maybe a little bit darker, I suppose. But most of that was started before this lockdown, so I don't think it's inspired by that. I think it's just everybody has peaks and troughs, and I also find you don't sit down and write something when everything's going great and you're happy, because you got stuff to do. You got to be out in the sunshine and see your friends and whatever. So for me, anyway, when I really commit a lot of time to writing a piece of music, it tends to be when I'm having a lull, and you kind of focus all your energy into that, and it might be quite negative energy, but at least it's a release.
Yeah, it's a productive use of your time, and I think it's interesting what you're saying about right now. You like at the start you were saying you felt like there was a bit of a block around songwriting, but you're using that time productively to you are advancing your skills as a musician as well, which is going to help with the songwriting process. When you do want to sit down and write, you're going to be better at the piano, or you're going to be better at whatever production skills you're working on, and you're fine tuning, because right now we have the time to kind of do those things as well. So you're using it productively.
Absolutely. And well, the thing is, especially with recording, and I suppose for playing live as well, your ability can be at one place, but I think if you're playing at the very height of your ability, you tend to make mistakes, or it comes across as kind of insincere, like you're trying too hard. Or for all my favorites, like all the greats in my eyes, like for piano example, like Thelonious Monk, the stuff that he was able to do compared to the stuff that he played live and even on his albums, there was a huge gap between the two, that he was only playing at about 40% ability, because he could go crazy and do Art Tatum kind of runs and all that. But I think if you get your ability to a certain point and then only end up using, say, 70-80% of it, you're comfortable playing it, and I think you can focus more on the touch and the emotion and inject that into it, and you can have little slurs there if you want, or put in a bum note on purpose, rather than, you're concentrating 100% and then there's no feeling involved. And it's the same with vocals as well. If you don't warm up your voice, then you're straining it to hit those high notes. Whereas once you've expanded your range, then you can comfortably kind of float in and out of all those. And I think it's very important you should absolutely be pushing yourself for your ability. But when it comes to writing and performing, I don't think you should be straining yourself. That's where mistakes come from. And that's where very technically they're good performances, but there's no emotion in it, because you don't have time to think about the color of the sound, or or focus on the timbre if you're playing violin, or, those kind of things. And I think those are the things that catch me the most, is tone and touch and timing and all that kind of stuff.
So when you're performing, I think naturally for everybody, when they perform, for the most part, you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Now, being on stage for most performers is exhilarating, but you're also pushing yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone to play in front of people, because it's not the most natural thing. It becomes natural over time. But from what you're saying, to get to that next level of playing, to be able to perform that in a comfortable way, you're kind of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. When you're at home, you're trying out those things that are more difficult all the time, and actually pushing your practice, rather than just going through the motions of, I'm going to play a few scales and then I'm going to play 3 or 4 songs and then I'm going to go watch TV. You're actually, these are the things that I want to focus on. I want to improve this element of my playing, and I'm going to work on that until it's part of my playing, and I can then take that into a live performance or a recording.
Yeah, I think, the margin for error when you're playing live, when you start introducing factors like nerves and the fact that the instrument mightn't be the same one that you play at home, and the keys might be slightly narrower and your fingers don't fall on the right place. All those things are opened up to you. Maybe you don't hear your voice in the fold back that well, and all those different things that you're still responsible for the performance. And so I think the thing that you're playing, or the piece that you're playing, should be well within the realms of your capability. You should be able to do it in your sleep, and then you can absolutely nail the performance. And it's the same with recording as well, to be honest. You can overdub things that are maybe beyond your ability, but I feel like you can hear when somebody's trying to show off. I think you can hear it in the performance.
Can you hear like pieced together parts as well, where it's very clear that somebody is...
Unless it's a very good producer. I think so. A very good producer can do it. I mean, you can do anything. You can play in with your mouse. You can play in melody lines on Logic or Ableton or whatever. A lot of people that are, very convincing of that, and they'll be able to use the velocity settings so that everything has a nice... For me, but for me, I just don't have the patience for it. I tend to play in live and then fix up any mistakes afterwards. The odd time I'll edit bass lines like that, but they're a bit more, stuck to the grid. So
you're Gavin O'Brien. That is who you are. Your name is there on the screen, but you go by Citóg. Can you explain what Citóg is, because it's an Irish word?
Anybody who's not Irish. So, I mean, not necessarily in our generation, but maybe a generation before. Actually, my parents' generation. If you're left-handed, it's the name for a left-handed person in Irish. But it was kind of a derogatory name for it. It meant that it was, being left-handed was a sign of the devil. And so my uncle, for example, was left-handed, and you weren't allowed to write with your left hand. You get a slap of the ruler and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it's not really, I never felt impression for being left-handed, really, to be honest. I just really like the word. And I've been called a Citóg for my whole life. I was really surprised that it wasn't used before, to be honest. There's a few Citógs in Ireland, so I'm sure a few of them make music.
Yeah. So the most important the most important question I think on everybody's mind is what's next. And nobody can really predict that right now, but people are going to keep making music and they're going to keep making art, especially while they're on lockdown and they've got the time. So what's next for Citóg?
Well, once this is all over, I need to go promote it properly. I mean, I'm doing as much as I can online. In hindsight, probably bad timing for the release, but who is to know? I'd set the date and I wanted to stick to it. And yeah, so I've just got to start gigging and touring and promoting it. I'm about halfway through a follow-up album, but that'll be probably a year away until
okay.
I bring that out. But yeah.
So if people want to, promoting, if people want to find you, it's the best place to get you is on Instagram, Citóg Music.
Citóg Music on Instagram, Citóg on Facebook, and then on Bandcamp, it's Citóg -Gavin. Or if you just search for Citóg, it's the first one that comes up. So it's CITO Father G, but it gets there without the father.
And a fada is an accent for anybody who isn't from Ireland like us.
Yeah.
And it's going to be on Spotify, Apple Music.
On Monday. Yeah. So the 27th.
Monday the 27th of April it's going to be released. All right. So Gavin is also kindly going to provide you with a few people with a gift of his album. So stay tuned and I'll let you know how you can get that. Gavin O'Brien, Citóg Music, thank you very much for your time.
Cheers, Steve.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that interview with Gavin, Citóg. And as I said, he's going to give away some copies of his album in digital form. All you have to do is head over to Citóg Music on Instagram and drop him a DM to let him know that you saw this interview and you liked what he had to say. The first 5 people that do that will get a free album, and I'm sure he'll also say very nice things to you and answer any questions you might have because he's good like that. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If you did, then please drop a like, give me a thumbs up, because 1, you can let me know that this is helpful, and 2, it lets other people know it's good stuff. You can also DM me on Instagram and let me know what you liked about this interview. And as I'm sure you know already, I don't just make podcasts. So if you want to know when my next podcast or video, tutorial or otherwise is ready to go, hit that subscribe button and you'll be notified whenever I've got something new for you. And that will be very soon. In the meantime, have fun making great music.